Well, I have some really neat announcements to make. I just heard from my publishers, so 2 books are going to come out. One book I'm supposed to get the proofs on Monday, and the next book I'm supposed to get the proofs the Monday after that. And they want to publish like a book every 2 months. And then they want to put another 8 or so books on contract. That's what they said. And they want to put them out like every 2 months in cycle. So I'm like, wow, let's see. We'll see what happens. This could be really cool. So I've been sending notes to my publisher back and forth, and you know, she's working on covers and other stuff. So we'll see what happens. I've been waiting for a while to hear back. So this could be kind of neat. I know I'm not a bestseller, but I wish I was a bestseller. It'd be kind of fun. Just have a bunch of books out. Anyway, none of them are about Greek. Well, actually, if they put on a contract, they were interested in the one about modern Greece. So we'll see. Maybe they'll do that one. That would be a real fun book.
Maybe I have to write a book about a Sunday school group.
Yeah!
It goes back in time or something.
Yeah, goes back in time. There you go. Oh, no! I don't know if anybody's ever done that one before.
Gilligan's Island kind of thing, right?
Yeah, Gilligan's Island, right.
A 3-day tour.
With dinosaurs.
3 hours.
That could be awe-inspiring, couldn't it? Well, we're still in Romans, and I want to stay in Romans. I'd like to finish it up. I'm thinking that when they ask for the next class, I'll do another class of finishing up Romans, because there's still a lot of good stuff in there, and we haven't hit everything right yet.
I think you should. You should feel good, because years and years ago, Pastor Trost taught Romans. We never got out of the first chapter, so.
That's so much for progress, right? Well, you know, what I really like, you know, is to be able to, I don't like to run down too many rabbit tracks, but I really like to be able to hit the most important parts so we understand the culture and we see how the logical train works in it. And so I really don't like rushing the end because, well, even though it's a Greek logos to telos, so after I give you enough information, you should be able to figure out yourself, right? There shouldn't be a telos at the end. Romans, we do expect a telos at the end. Matter of fact, I showed you there was. But you know what I'm saying, is that it shouldn't matter once you get the tools to use. But it is always nice to look at the Greek in depth to see what it really is saying and see how the arguments play out. In any case, the word of the day, I'm going to give you this word again. This is E-N-T-O-L-E-S, entoles. Entoles means in. What do you think this word is? Telos. Telos. And this is in. This is a preposition. The preposition in means basically, it's a relation of rest. It's like German. Well, it's more of German. Not on. Can't remember the German preposition for being on top of something, being on something. It means at or in. It's at rest, something at rest. And so, and telos, we know what a telos is. Telos is the projection on the horizon, basically the point, the vanishing point, yeah, vanishing point, thank you very much. The point where it vanishes on the horizon. And in telos, specifically in meaning an at telos, or a specific telos. Ooh, a specific telos is probably the best way to read this. We translate this to be a commandment or precept. Now, I just want you to think really closely. A commandment, okay, a commandment or a precept. Does anybody see a problem with this? What's a precept in English?
Preconceived notion, right?
It can be a preconceived notion. It can also be something that you've learned through experience, right? A precept can be something that is a declaration, but it's a declaration of experience, right?
And not necessarily facts.
and not necessarily facts per se, right? It's a precept, an idea, where what's a commandment?
Hard and fast, black and white.
Yeah, hard and fast will. Not necessarily, well, a hard and fast law, right? A law, a thing. So is there a difference between a precept and a commandment?
Oh, yeah.
A significant difference, right? But we want to take this word entolos, in Greek, and make it into either a commandment or a precept. So, in telos being a specific telos, is it closer to a precept or a commandment?
Precept. It's, based on the information that you have right now, it's the decision. Because doesn't the vanishing point, depending on your perspective, kind of can change?
Yes.
When you look at something on the horizon, it changes depending on where your perspective is.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, an in telos is probably closer to a conclusion than a telos, right? A telos can be, depending on your perspective, right, could potentially have lots of different teloses. It depends on what kind of argument we're making, right? But an in telos has how many? One. Yeah, basically one, right? It is a conclusion in the sense of an English conclusion to a degree. Because a conclusion still can be driven by a different perspective, right? A precept is closer. But is either a commandment or precept completely what an entelos obviously is? No. Not really. Yes, sir?
When you say conclusion, you keep telling us that Greek is so mathematical. Does that mean like the answer in a mathematical sense?
Remember
it being one thing?
Yes.
Two has to be four, so is that an entelos then? Something that's specific?
I would say that, yes, that's true. Remember, Greek is geometric. So when I say that Greek is mathematically based, I'm always talking about geometry, because they didn't have mathematics in the sense that we have mathematics, right? When we think of mathematics, we think 1 + 1 = 2. When a Greek thinks of mathematics, what does a Greek person think about? Theorem. Yeah, that's right. Theorems. They think about theorems. They think about, a triangle. They think about and you say, well, what do they think about that? They think about, remember, a² + b² = c²? Except they don't think in terms of the a² + b² + c². They think in terms of the lines. When they see a circle, they think in terms of pi, but to them pi is what? It's a relationship. Exactly, it's a relationship. Pi is the distance of a unitary circle, if you forgot that from geometry. So, basically, when they think, they're not thinking like we are, that pi is, 3.1416, ... forever, right? They think in terms of pi is this distance of the unitary circle where the radius is 1. See? That's the way they think. And so, thinking that they think mathematically is a good closeness, but do you see how far away they are from us in the way they think about things? Because we don't think about things like this at all, right? So you wonder about, the way that they built, for example, their temples. How the perspective. Do you realize the perspective in a temple? Temples are actually designed so that, I'm trying to remember which way they are. Are they this way or are they this way? I believe they're this way. So that why? Do you know why?
It's a distortion of perspective.
It's an intentional distortion of perspective, so when you look at them, they look like this. That's the way Greek people think in the ancient world. Wow. Yeah, you say, wow. Do we think about that? No, we just build a skyscraper and it's straight, right? We'd never think about building it so that when you looked at it, it looked like it was straight. You think, well, that's crazy, right? But this is the balance of their whole thinking. And so this idea of a telos, everything comes from this telos thing in Logos. Yeah.
Think that was intentional, or was it guys standing back saying, all right, that looks straight. By the time they were done, it was that way. It looked straight, but
well,
when you measure it, it really wasn't.
It could be accident, except we have all this written down stuff where the Greeks actually wrote down about the principles of beauty And they started with the principle of beauty, and I haven't prepared this, so it's really digging deep into what I've taught before. But I believe it's 5 by 3, I think. You know, a 3 by 5 card is the perfect thing of beauty. That's how you can remember this. And so they noted the perfect proportions of what looks right as a rectangle to people, to human beings. Everybody thinks that a rectangle, for some reason, looks right if it's like this, right? It doesn't look right if it's not 3 by 5. If I draw you a rectangle that looks like this, you say, well, that's not very much a rectangle, right? Or if I draw you a rectangle that looks like this, you say, well, I know it's a rectangle, but it doesn't look right. See? So they knew this, and when they built their temples, they were building the temples to be 3 by 5, but they wanted them to look like they were straight. So they intentionally designed geometrically. They went, and probably, it was trial and error, right? But they knew exactly the correct measurements to make, and they write about this stuff. You can go even further. I want to write a paper about it because it's really neat. Have you ever seen the Greek tombs? What's the characteristic of all Greek tombs? Go to Nicaea. Do you know what you look for? The Greek mound tombs, Greek hill tombs. There's always a triangle above the door. You know why? When the Greeks first started building tombs, they built the tombs with just like this, and what happened? Anybody know? They cracked. They cracked like this, and then they fell in. Yeah, that's right. And so is bat. So then what they said is, how do we relieve stress forces on doors that we dig into rock? Aha! How do you reduce stress forces? You put a triangle above it, and guess what happens? You leave the stress, you transfer the stress away from the door frame so it cracks over here. That's okay, because it doesn't break, it doesn't fall down, see? So it's really smart. And if you ever find an ancient culture that digs holes in rocks and doesn't put a triangular piece above it, they're just dumb. They just haven't reached the level of even Greek thinking in early tombs. We're talking way early, 1000 BC. Well, they went from that to what? What did they do? In Nicaea, you can see it. They made a terrible mistake. They thought that this would relieve, when I built a door and a door frame, because I want to put a door with a lintel on it, right? And so to reduce stress, what should I do? Put a triangular rock on top of it. Well, that kind of worked, but remember what I told you? You draw the stresses over here. And so they cracked over there, although the Nicene doorway is still existing. So how do I design my temples? I design temples that have pillars with a triangular roof, like this. You ever seen something like that? What's that called?
Parthenon.
Parthenon, yeah. So instead of building it like this, like who was building it like this? You guys know.
The Hebrews, the temples.
The Hebrews, who else? Your relatives, guys, the Celts. Yeah. Celts and Scots. Remember what happened at Stonehenge? And how many of the stones are still standing? And what do you have to do? Greek stuff's still standing. It's like thousands and thousands of years old. What happened to Stonehenge? Fell down. Okay? You get smart when you do things engineering-wise, right? Have good engineers, because then it works. So just, this goes on, goes on, goes on. These are all cultural things. And we think, why do we think they did? Well, what is our general impression because of our lack of education in the American educational system? What do we think the Greeks did? Trial and error and built something esoteric they thought will look good, right? What did they really do?
Engineering principles.
They designed stuff based on geometric engineering principles after thousands and thousands of years of development where they remembered what they did previously. See? The Celts, are they still, are the Celts around? Kind of ish, right? The Greeks still around? Oh, kind of. They may last for another couple of years. They run out of money. But all the stuff they left us, right? And who does Celtic architecture? You mean there's no Stonehenges around? I think there's the Carhenge, right? You know, the guy did Carhenge. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
But I'm not waiting. I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for, you know, Celtic architecture, because it doesn't exist, right? So, you know, the big deal is, isn't it interesting? Or how about this? How about ancient Egyptian architecture? Nah. Although there is, that one hotel in Vegas. So anyway, this stuff's really fun. It all fits together. Remember, you know, history and culture all fit together. You can't separate them. If you try and separate them, that's why I had somebody on Facebook and said, can you put a paragraph down about some concept? And I said, look, it took me 4 years to teach you basic aerodynamics, right? You go to school, you don't teach a guy in a paragraph aerodynamics. So why do you think you can learn something that's complex with a single paragraph? You know, do you see this? This is what we think in our modern age. We think we can learn something by someone telling us in a single paragraph an answer, right? You can never learn anything that way. That's silly. The only way to learn is what? Working very hard and using skills and using time and using effort to learn it. And that's something we seem to have forgotten. Because learning's supposed to be what? Fun. Well, I think learning's fun when you really dig in and work hard to learn. And that's what this is all about, is learning something that's very complex. You know, the language of the Greeks is not an easy thing. And the culture of the Greeks is not something that can be written on a postcard, even though they did invent the size of a postcard. You know, all this stuff, it fits all together. And if you wonder why we have postcards the same size, it comes from the Greeks. But in any case, we've been talking in Romans about the Paulian argument that he gives to the Romans. And the overall argument is to do what? What does he want the Romans to know?
It applies to them, all this other stuff.
This stuff about Christ applies to them. They're already convinced that Jehovah, the God Jehovah, somehow can apply to them, to the Romans. But they're wondering, you know, does this Jesus also apply? And also, what do you think they're in their mind, in the basic Roman mind that he's writing to, what do you think they think Jesus is?
He's a Jew and they're a Gentile.
Well, he's a Jew and they're a Gentile, but what do they think he is in terms of the large picture?
He's a God.
He's a God. He's a God. He's another God. See? So Paul is likely going to do, well, he already has to a degree. He's really given them this spiel about who Jesus is, right? We've been through this. Because his argument, he gave them arguments against their gods and idols, against their mysterion, against their pathos and faith, basically against the whole idea of pathos and faith, against their domestic lives, against their basic nature, etc. So then he said, you know, basically the Jews can't follow their law. He's tying this into the Judaic thought. And he says, therefore everybody has missed the mark. Harmantia has, we call it sin, but literally in the Greek is missed the mark. And then there's that question, should I do more evil so that God's righteousness or goodness increases? And that question is asked 3 times in Romans. So far we've seen it 3 times. It's asked 3 times. Now remember what I told you about ancient literature. If I repeat it more than once, what does that mean? It's critically important in the argument. In any case, the solution that Paul gives to miss the mark is Jesus Christ. And this is where he makes his arguments about who Jesus Christ is. And we'll probably see more of that. We'll just see what happens. Then his conclusion is the God of the Hebrews is also the God of the Gentiles and the Romans. And the example he gave, remember, was Abraham. And I love this quote. This is 24, I can't remember what, I think it's 424. But anyway, it says, but also for us to whom God will credit righteousness, that is diakosune, for us who believe, who are persuaded, pistis, in him who raised Jesus Christ, our Lord, from the dead. So in other words, the question about Jesus Christ being a God, who raised Jesus Christ? God rose Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ is not a God per se. See, this is getting to that Trinitarian kind of idea. And of course, this is pretty early for Paul to get into it. but yet he is the one who was raised by God. And therefore, where is your persuasion? What is your persuasion? Is your persuasion that Jesus Christ rose from the dead?
God did.
No, that God raised him from the dead. Because the point is that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead is what?
Great connection.
Well, it's a fact. It's a fact. You see, this is what we've missed. In the modern world, is there truth?
There's just shades of gray.
Yeah, I hope there is real truth because we do aerodynamic science, and if you don't have truth, then obviously airplanes don't fly, right?
Right.
There's truth. But yeah, what Bill says is right. The viewpoint of the world is that there's all shades of gray. I hope not, because, you don't want the question, well, will this 707 fly today? Or will this, 787 fly today? Well, yeah, the batteries are off. But it still flies, right? It still flies. The big question that we should have is, well, what is truth? Well, science answers that question pretty well, right? There are truths in science. So if there are truths in science, are there truths in other things?
Yeah.
It's got to be. Otherwise, what do you live in? What kind of world are you living in, This is where I think we have a huge educational breakdown. The point is this. Facts are facts. And the fact to the Greeks and the Romans was Jesus Christ rose from the dead. The pistis, or the belief, the persuasion was not that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, but rather who raised him from the dead. And you know why this is a critical question to them? What would the Jews say? Matter of fact, what does the Talmudic sources say the source of Jesus Christ's resurrection was?
The devil.
Not exactly, but it's close. I'll give you that. That's a good answer. But what they said something specific, very specific. They called him this in the Talmud. A magician, a sorcerer. They said it was sorcery, which sorcery comes from Satan.
Right.
So their whole thing was the Jews were saying that Christ rose from the dead because of sorcery. What does that automatically tell you?
He rose from the dead.
They acknowledge he rose from the dead.
Yeah.
They tell you that Jesus Christ's father was Padua, something ben Padua. Can't remember what his first name. Something ben Padua. That he was a Roman soldier who raped Mary. What does that immediately tell you?
I believe she had a child.
Well, she had a child, Jesus, but also that there was a question about
His birth.
the birth of the father.
Right.
Bingo, bango, bongo. People, I have this all the time. People say, Christ is a myth. Well, he's probably the most documented myth that ever existed, but okay. If you want to think that, that's kind of like, this is where we've missed the mark in teaching people. Because the facts point to Jesus was alive and Caesar was, well, I'm not sure about Caesar because I don't have as many proof documents as I do for Jesus. But somehow we've become distorted in the modern era, in any case. And then Paul finally gives us the better way. Remember the better way? Everybody was aiming for, in the Greek world, what were they aiming for? Dikasune. 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 They're looking for balance. This is balance, equitability. But Paul says what is better than, what is greater than dikasune?
Good.
Goodness.
Good. Agthos. Good. And that's what he's going to show is a better way. How to be good. If you ever wonder what Romans is about, Romans is a proof text to the Romans that, number one, Jesus Christ is applicable to them. His death and resurrection is applicable. And what does it do for you? And then finally, how can you be good? How can you achieve dikasune first, and how can you be good second? So in 7, this is chapter 7:1. Do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to men who know the law, that the law has authority over a man only as long as he lives. Paul makes this very clear to us, that he is doing two things. What is he doing with these people? It's obvious he's speaking to whom, and what is he speaking to them specifically about? You notice that Paul is flattering them. Look what he says. Do you not know, brothers? For I'm speaking to men who know the law. That's pretty flattering, right? If I told you and you're a Jew that you knew the law, what is that? That is a huge compliment. That means you know what? The Mishnah, the Talmud, the Torah, you know everything. He's saying this to Romans and Greeks and Jews.
Okay, well, I'm not so nitpick, but is men really men, or is it neutral?
It's anthropos. Anthropos means man-faced, which is a generic word like in German. You guys remember man versus man? This is why English is so, it's driving me crazy sometimes. We want gender neutrality. In German you have gender neutrality because it's really cool. Because man is a specific man, as in, you know, a man as opposed to a, in German, Frau, a Frau, also capitalized, where man means all people, all human beings, okay, all humans. And in the Greek, what it means is all human beings. You know, it's really interesting. We translate it, and I'm not into the gender neutrality of degenderizing words, but in this case, a lot of these words for men could be easily changed to humans or people in the text. Yeah.
Did the Greeks have the same type of issue? I mean, he's speaking for those who know the law. Is there a difference between knowing and understanding? Knowing as being able to recite as knowing what the heck you're talking about?
Well, a Jewish person trained in the Talmud would say, in the Mishnah, would say, of course I know it, because I know all the arguments around it. Now, whether you would agree with their conclusions is another point. You see, because Jesus didn't necessarily agree with their conclusions, right? In some cases, he said the Talmudic, and see, this is where I think we really miss the mark ourselves. I love this, miss the mark. How much it? We miss the mark because when we study a lot of Jewish stuff about Jesus, we don't look at the Talmudic and the Mishnah sources. And yet, in America, I've heard this all the time from pastors. They say, well, we don't know what Korban is. Korban is that thing that Christ says that talks about, I'm not going to go into huge detail. Anyway, if you go look in the Gospels and look up the word Korban, it's the authority that you give to the priests as opposed to your father and mother. Remember, Jesus said that you're giving to your priests instead of to the father and mother, to your rabbi. Yeah, remember that? And I've had a lot of pastors tell me, we don't know what that means. Well, that means the pastors never studied Talmudic sources, because the Talmud is very clear on what it is. See? So, what I'm saying is, we tend to study, like, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and, the New Testament without looking at all the other sources that are the background for that information. And so we miss the mark in not understanding all the stuff. When they say the law, they mean the whole nomos, which includes the oral Torah, the Mishnah, and the Talmudic stuff, as well as the Torah. That's why I say, he's flattering them. This is an obvious flattery. Because to say that is huge. You know that. How long do rabbis study the Talmud? Their whole life. Yeah. Have you ever read Stein's works? There's a whole bunch of neat works by different Jewish authors. I suggest you read them, just for a knowledge of the Jewish community and how they work and how they think. Orthodox Jewish community, a rabbi, a young man, spends his whole life in study of the Talmud. And some Jewish scholars, that's all they do. They don't do anything other than study. And of course, they do have to have a wife. A rabbi has to have a wife. Well, at least in the Orthodox Judaism. So hopefully he spends time with her, but anyway. 2, for example, and this is some interesting stuff here. For example, by law, a married woman is bound, literally to bind, deo, to her husband as long as he is alive. If her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Now, I want to ask you a really important question about this. Number 1, literally this says that a woman is bound to the law of her husband. Number 1, is this Jewish thought? Is this Greek thought? Is this Roman thought? What do you think?
Roman.
What do you think? 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 What In Jewish thought, what does a man and woman do when they are married? In Jewish thought. Well, that's a good thing. To be married in Jewish thought, you write a contract. You write a contract. So is it law? What is it? Is a contract, you know, if I have a contract between two people,
It's legally binding, right?
it's legally binding by law.
But can probably be amended or revised, is it not?
It gives who rights? Who has rights? Both have rights. If you have a contract, you both have rights, right? And so it's not that the woman is, right, under Jewish law, it's a contract. So there is ways that women can break that contract and men can break the contract. We know that one of the arguments, one of the huge fights between the school of Gamaliel and the school of Jerusalem was, what does it take for a man to break his legal contract with his wife? And the school of, I'm trying to remember, I think it's Jerusalem school said that you can break it for any reason. You know, if she burns your dinner or, you know, or says a bad word to you or whatever, you can break it. Where the school of the Gamaliel said, no, it has to be infidelity. And so that was one of the reasons they asked the big question of Jesus. What about the Greeks? Is this a Greek problem? Well, in Greek law, is a woman bound by law?
She is, but he's not.
Yeah, kind of not. She's not bound by law, she's bound by chains. In Greek worldview, they put them in a gynoseum, for goodness sakes. They're locked away from the world, okay? So, they're not bound by law, they're bound by chains. It's not a Greek problem. The Greek problem was answered in Thessalonians, where Paul said, give your women authority, for goodness sakes, right? The big deal here is it's not a Greek problem and it's not a Hebrew problem. So whose problem is it? It's a Roman problem. Because in the Roman law, which is very interesting, and this is a Roman thing, and you know, you can look at this negatively or you can look at this positively. I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing. Because a woman bound by law in Greek, in Roman law, meant that she was protected, both from her husband, because she had rights under Roman law. And so I just wanted to point this out to you, because it literally means the law of her husband. Now, the reason this is important to Paul is because if the law of the husband is very good or positive, then this is a positive. So you can look at this either way. So then it goes to 3. So then if she marries, become literally to be with another man. If she comes to be with another man, while her husband is still alive, she is called an adulteress. And it's very interesting. She is called a mochalis, which means literally in the Greek, male lover, but it's a feminine declension of the word mochalis. So what it means is, this is a word, the Greek word is male lover, but it has been feminized by making it a female form, which is really interesting, because that shows that the Greeks have a problem with homosexuality. If her husband dies, she is released from that law. That is the law of her husband, and is not an adulteress, even though she marries another man.
So Lionel, is this a problem why isn't it like reverse? Why isn't Paul talking about if a wife dies, the husband is released? Or, the reverse of it?
Because I think lately he's writing to men. And remember, okay, a lot of people don't like Paul for some reason. I don't know why they don't like Paul. I think Paul was incredibly freedom-oriented for his time. Because remember, he said there's no difference in the gospel between male and female, slave or free. That's a very strong mysterion thoughts. But that sounds pretty modern to me, right? Saying equality for everyone in Christianity, which should have been a byword for us forever. But he's writing mostly to men because men are mostly what?
Educated.
The educated class. Remember, women are not, the Jews aren't training women in the Talmud, in the Torah, in the Mishnah, right? That does not happen. That will not happen in the ancient world. Okay? Women are generally not trained to read and write, right? You know, if they do, that's, you know, they picked it up somehow through some other means, or the husband might have taught them. So, you know, in general, the educated class, unfortunately, is not women. And he's writing them in. And so the examples he gives are going to be what? If he gives an example from a female standpoint, are the guys going to understand it? Nah, they're not going to understand it. You know? So he's going to pound them, right? And the point he's making, the very important point he's making is, so this is what he says in 4. So my brothers, you also have died to the law through the body, literally the soma, the whole being of Christ, that you might belong to another, to him who was raised, Egerio, literally Egerio, awakened from the dead. Again, we get that thing. Remember, there's no word for resurrection in Greek or any other ancient language, so it has to be roused, or literally wakened, Egerio, from the dead. The other word is, anyway, it starts with an A, an alpha. That in order that we might bear fruit to God. And look at this. Look at what he's done here, okay? Look at what he's done here. Number one, he just compared them with women. With women. Look what he said. So brothers, so my brothers, literally the people of another womb, brothers of another womb. You also died to the law through the body, through the soma, the whole being of Christ, that you might belong to another. So in other words, they were what? Married to Satan or something else, right? And they died to that, and now they are married to Christ. We don't get it unless we're pointed out to us. But a Greek person, a Roman person reading this, Paul just compared us to women. Now, you know, look, ladies, he just said that all these Christian believers are women, are like women. Being married to something else and then dying through Christ to be married to Christ. This is in the Gospels too. I pointed out to you when we were doing the Matthew class. Beautiful stuff. And look what the final thing is. In order that we might bear fruit to God, which is an implication of childbirth. Right? I don't know. The only thing I can get out of this is that Paul had a great respect for women. And the comparison. 5. So when we were controlled by the sinful nature, literally by the sarx, the sinful passions, pathema, literally the fated passions. Happy Valentine's Day. Thanks.
Hey, he's got random love there.
Random love. Thanks, guys.
That was beautiful to watch, by the way.
That was good. It's on tape. Well, you don't have to give me a Valentine's thing or whatever. Just draw me one, okay?
That may have been it there.
That may be it. Maybe Tammy paid for it. That's it. So we were controlled by the sinful nature, the sarx, the sinful passions, pathema. Literally, I love this. Pathema. Pathos, the fated passions. Pathema. Remember, the Greek view, the world view of pagans is that you are fated and you can't get rid of your fate. What's the Christian worldview? Yeah, the opposite of fated. The whole message that Paul tries to give, the whole message of Paul is you are not fated. Now, why is this important to the Romans and Greeks, but not to the Jews? The Jews never believed they were fated. The Jews always believed that they could change or accept God, right? Where the view of the ancient world of the pagans was that you were fated. And so when Paul writes, so we were controlled by the sinful nature, the sarx, the sinful pathema, the fated passions, aroused by the law. Now, which law is he talking about? Remember, at first he was talking about the nomos, about the Torah. And then he was talking about the law of a husband to a wife. And that's pretty Roman. So what law is he talking about here? See, I think that what law do we always kind of assume it is?
Torah.
The Torah. Is it the Torah? I'd say no. Because he's saying, aroused by what law? He was talking about all kinds of law. Different types of law. And when he's talking about the Romans about law, what's the Romans' law? Do the Romans have a law?
Yeah.
They have a very strong law structure. So, when he says this, aroused by the law were at work in our bodies, and they bore the fruit of death. And you see how the same childbirth thing is being portrayed in here by Thantos in 6. For now by lying to what once bound us. A woman under Roman law of her husband is what? Bound by that law. He's doing a direct comparison, but by dying to what once bound us, that was the law of our husband, who was Satan, or Sarx is what he specifically said, Sarx. We have been released from the law so that we serve in a new way of the Spirit, pneuma, and not in the old way of the written code. Literally, it's gramma, a writing, gramma. And if you remember, if Paul wanted to tell us he's talking about Scripture, he has lots of words, right? When Paul writes about the Torah, what word does he usually use? Does anybody remember? I always give it the very first or second class. Membranus. Membranus is usually, that's the word, because that means a vellum. That means something written on vellum. Membranus. And the other one is, his letters were usually biblios. Biblios is basically papyrus. Instead, he says gramma. Gramma means any written thing. So obviously the law he's talking about is any written code, which includes the Roman code, the Greek code, and also the Hebraic code. Now it's very interesting, isn't it? Isn't it ironic that what he said to them is, I know you are men well versed in the law. This could give you a hint when he's writing to these people. The Romans he's writing to may be lawyers in the Roman sense would be if you knew the law, senators, that's right. He may be writing to very highly placed, and okay, think about this. Who would be wealthy enough to own Torah scrolls or have Talmudic training, right? Okay. Who would be wealthy enough to know Greek? Who knew Greek? Did Pilate know Greek? Probably. Did Felix know Greek? Maybe, maybe not. And we're not clear about that. Because remember, the Romans, sent people that didn't necessarily know. I think they tried to send guys that knew Greek to these outlying areas because Greek was the universal language, right? But we know there's a lot of Romans that didn't know Greek. So, very interesting. And notice what he said. What word did Paul use in the past when he was talking about things not spiritual, but remember what he used? What's the 3 parts of the human being, according to the Greeks? Sarx, Suke, Pneuma. And throughout the whole of Romans, what did Paul say that man was? What did he address? Sarx and Suke. And now he's addressing Pneuma. This is really important because Sarx and Suke, according to Jewish thought, make up the man. But Pneuma is that spiritual thing, right? So what does he say? 6, again, but now, by dying what once bound us, you have been released from the law so that we serve in the new way of the pneuma. And by the way, you notice he uses new way. Does that sound similar to something else? Teen hodos. Remember I told you there's a reason why he wouldn't use the word teen hodos? Because there's lots of teen hodoses in Rome, the Appian way, right? La la la, etc., etc. But he talks about hodos, the new way. The new way. This also fits within that kind of mysterion idea. Not in the old way of the written code. So in the past it was psuche, now it's pneuma, and he appeals to the Romans because the Romans are focused on rule of law. I think what's really important to note culturally in this, what flips the Hebrews switch? Torah, right? Torah. What flips the Greek switch?
Philosophy.
Yeah, not law, philosophy. What flips the Roman switch?
Law.
Law. Law. Rule of law. Anyway, 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. Indeed, I would not have known what sin was except through the law. For I would not have known what coveting really was if the law had not said, do not covet. And that comes from Exodus and Deuteronomy. I'm not going to quote those. In 8. But harmentia is the mark, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment. And the word for commandment is in telos. In telos. But sin, harmentia, missing the mark, seizing the opportunity afforded by the in telos, produced in me every kind of covetous desire. And the word is epithumia. Epithumia. Let me see if I can put this all together for you. And then finally the thing is, apart from law, sin is dead. So the point here is this. Listen to this. The opportunity afforded by the, not commandment, by the what? By the specific telos. By the specific telos. What is the specific telos of the law? Let's start first. What is the specific telos of the Hebraic law? Where do you go? You can't follow every precept of the law. So what's happening to you? What is the sacrifice that solves all the problems of the law for you? Death. You're dead. That's right. The in telos of the law is death. That's the Jewish law. What is the in telos of Roman law? In Roman law, okay,
Slavery.
that's a good answer. That is a good answer. In Roman law in the ancient world, did they incarcerate people? No, ma'am. No, sir. People were not incarcerated until when? When did people first get incarcerated for breaking the law? Where did that happen? Huh? Nope. United States of America. United States of America, the Quakers did not like, okay, how did people get punished back in the ancient world? There's only really 3 ways to punish people. You can add the 4th if you really want to get kind of into the Greek, and I can tell you what it is. You won't necessarily like it. You enslave them, you kill them, you
Flog them.
You flog them, you basically, flogging is all those torturous things. So you put them in the stocks, you throw stuff at them, you put them in the stocks, you hold them in a, you could say this is incarceration, but you basically put them in the stocks in the weather for days and weeks at a time. If they survive, people throw stuff at them, maybe somebody hopefully feeds them, right? And the third way is by sexually molesting them. The Greeks were well into this, that in Greek thought, that, like, for example, a lot of those things that people think are sexual or not sexual, they are warning signs that you will be raped if you steal or whatever. For example, in Greek culture, it was common to punish people through sexual things. So those are the 4 ways that people were punished in the ancient world. Did you have a question?
Well, Paul, we read that Paul was in prison. Was that sort of until some adjudication can be made?
Yes.
Flog him or
You would,
whatever, or throw him out of
you could
town?
you could be incarcerated in a on a temporary basis for your trial, right?
Okay.
And you might incarcerate political prisoners.
But the conclusion of trial was never incarceration.
Right.
You weren't getting prison for life.
The reason somebody might be in prison for life, and this happened a lot in the ancient world, they put you in prison and say your trial is
Whenever we get to it.
whenever we get to it. And then they never get to it.
Right.
Or you might die before you get it. They did a lot with political prisoners. Because, you could be you could put incarcerated for political things.
What about exile, like John was exiled? Is that a form of torture?
I'll give you that. Exile and, there's another, banishment.
Oh,
Okay, that's fifth, okay? That's fifth, out of fifth to that.
Mutilation.
That would be included in torture and, for example, physical incarceration, because that's what happened this is what happened. In the United States of America, we didn't banish generally, although some communities did banish. And generally, we didn't use sexual stuff. We kill people, which is reasonable for certain crimes. But in general, the most common prison or common thing was to put people in the stocks and mutilate or flog them or leave them there for long times. And the equivalent, remember Hester Prynne? She was put in the stocks for 30 days, I think, if I remember right, and then she was forced to wear a letter A. That is basically Puritan and Quaker thinking. Quakers and the Puritans, Puritans not so much, but the Quakers really said, we think that this is unkind treatment. That's why we got the words, by the way, in the Constitution about, what's the word? Cruel and unusual punishment. That's Quaker. And the Quakers said this is cruel and unusual. What we should do is if we're going to incarcerate people by putting them, we shouldn't do it in public because that's public shaming. We should put them into a safe place where they can't be harmed by others or harm themselves. And probably there was also sexual stuff going on even in the colonies. And, that was really common with women who were placed in the stocks. You can guess what's happening. Yeah.
One of my Quaker ancestors was deported twice from the Plymouth colony. The third time they cut off his ear and deported him. That's mutilation.
Yeah, that's mutilation.
The Puritans did that.
But the Quakers eventually, the ones who really changed a lot of the legal codes, and the legal codes of, for example, incarcerating people, that idea, it had always been around, right? But the idea of incarcerating people after trial was kind of a new idea that came from the Quakers. And it's, I don't know, I guess we call it more humane. Today we say, well, that's not humane, which cracks me up, There's a lot less humane things you can do than 3 squares and all the bodybuilding equipment you need, plus TV.
What was the Roman thing? Get back to what the Roman thing was. You were asking us what
The Roman,
form of punishment was.
oh, the Roman form of punishment, that's what I'm saying. They did all those forms of punishment. But the big point is that, that the Roman, what would be the end of the Roman law would be basically slavery or death. So if you were punished by Rome, if you, for example, couldn't pay your bill, you were a thief, what would happen to you, right? You'd be enslaved to pay it back. No use wasting that labor, see? So it's very common to do slavery. And so the end part of this, what it's saying is, the end of the law, whatever that law is, was basically that is either slavery or death. And that produced in me every kind of covetous desire. And you notice what the covetous desire is. It's not covetous desire, it's epithumia. So what did this threat of death or enslavement, what did it make you want to do? The threat of death or enslavement made you want to? Epithumia. Epithumia. What's epithumia?
It's a sacrifice versus the smell or whatever.
It makes you want to do a sacrifice to God, right? See, we misread this. We misunderstand what Paul is saying. It's not saying that the sin...
So it makes him want to atone for his sin.
It makes you want to atone for your sin. It doesn't say that it produced in you a desire for doing something wrong. It's saying it produced in you a desire to
atone.
To atone. Right. Everyone has a desire to atone when their sin is pointed out to them. That's part of the law. If the law didn't exist, what would be my sin? What would be it? There wouldn't be anything because why? I wouldn't realize I'm doing something right. It's like a little kid. A little kid, until you tell the kid, don't do that, what's the kid going to do? It's okay, right? And then you tell him that's wrong, you've shamed him, the child wants to do what now? Well, hopefully, wants to atone for the crime, we hope. Atone for the sin. Now, Paul may be writing only to mature people. Maybe we have a problem with people. But in the Roman thought, what's the Roman thought? Romans are driven by rule of law, right? So if you're a Roman, what do you want to do? Obey the law. You want to obey the law. So he's writing this specific in 9. Once I was alive apart from law, but when the entola, the position limit, basically came, told me, the position limit, that is death or sin or slavery, Harmantia sprang to life, and I died. Harmantia sprang to life. I missed the mark, and so I died. And so, let's see, do I have any notes here? I have some notes. Directly appealing to the Romans who just came to know the law and also are basically focused in the law. They learned the law of Moses, etc. Anyway. 10. I found the very commandment, the very intola, the position limit that was intended to bring life actually brought death. Why is that? The reason is because the law has, we think of the law as what? Just commandments. But they're not. They're the three parts. They're the commandment, the chot, the mitzvot, the chot, and the chot, mitzvot. Anyway, the three parts of the law. The commandment of the law, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not murder. And then the explanation of the law, that is what cases does murder follow? What is murder? Is an explanatory case. And the third part is the punishment for it. If you murder, you are put to death. See? Those are three parts. Now the reason this is important, and I'll conclude with this, because remember in a mitzvot, which is the last part of the law, what other kind of mitzvots are there? There's negative mitzvots, like if you don't do this, you get punished. There are positive mitzvots that if you do the blessings, what happens? You're making good points with God, right? So the law was supposed to be what? If you did the law, you would get good points. I'll get into more of this next week. Thanks for your attention. Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you give us. We thank you for your word. We pray that you look after us through this week. In your name we pray, amen.